that you can do.
Today we have here with us Dr. Carlson Nkwain. And well, he has one amazing journey that would blow your mind. And it's nice to actually have him here with us to give us his time and an in-depth view of what his life has been like from Cameroon to where he currently is right now. So, Dr. Carlson, it's nice to have you here with us.
The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is essentially mine. I'm really about sharing my experiences. I said from Cameroon to where I am, and I will say from Cameroon through Ghana. Yes, from Cameroon through Ghana to where I am right now, which is the UK. So I'm really looking forward to reflecting and retrospecting on that journey, hoping it could inspire at least just one person to achieve that turning point in their life, which all of us need here and now again.
I'm really happy that you started with the fact that you said from Cameroon through Ghana to where you
Yeah,
are today. And
yeah.
as a Ghanaian, I would love to be a little bit biased, even though I love the continent as a whole. But it's nice to know that at least Ghana has a role to play in what you're about to tell us today.
Oh, most definitely, more than you can even think about it. But yeah,
Ooh. So
yeah.
before the PhD title and before the whole exposure to where you currently are right now. Before that, who were you growing up? What was life like for young, very, very young Carlson?
That's a very interesting question. Kind of a question prompting me to listen to go back 30, 25 years ago, trying to listen to remember growing up as a kid and also yeah. But what I could say is growing up was more or less as you mentioned, I'm from Cameroon and I am from Bamenda, Cameroon. And I think most people will see Cameroon as being a French country. I won't blame them because Cameroon is both English and French, but it's predominantly French.
Mhm.
So Bamenda is one of the English-speaking towns or regions in Cameroon. So that's where I grew up in Cameroon. A very modest community in Bamenda called my form Queen. And in growing up, it was more or less, so it felt like growing up, my name should have been Joseph instead of Carlson or Carl. And that's Joseph in the sense of
Mhm.
being a dreamer, full of dreams. That's what I mean. And also doesn't come from a modest background, but then now with those rich expectations or very expensive dreams, if we may let's put it that way. And one thing I remember very much well, especially in this context, is more or less of the aspect of me other than being a dreamer was being curious. And being curious was a time of spending a lot of time in the library or a lot of time reading. I would say there's something which you don't know about my background, which I'll just give you some sort of my time in Cameroon before Ghana.
Okay.
Uh was yeah, I was in a minor seminary. So there was a time point there
Really?
were dreams, not my dreams, of me becoming a this and me becoming a priest. And yeah, there was that time. And moving through now, there was also me being in pharmacy school as well. But why I had to mention these was because while in the minor seminary, I remember one of the crimes I was guilty of
Hmm.
was breaking bounds into the library and stealing books from the library. So during mass, during prayer sessions, I was always reading a novel instead of reading my prayers. So that's just that introspect into me, this and me growing up. So yeah, that was me listening growing up in Cameroon.
If I actually get you,
Yeah.
from what you just narrated, right, I'm picturing you as that one young kid who was always had his face in his books and
Yeah.
he's quiet, staying out of trouble. Is that what life was like?
Uh, yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no in the sense yeah, I always had my head in this in my book. So I was, as academically speaking, I think I was always not the first in my class, but top in my class because I would want to say I was the first. And then when we go to do the records, where my kids go to check the records, and then I was actually the first, and then like that, you like. But it's more or less of yeah, education wise, I was always very committed to that. thinking about it. Did a BSc, started an MSc in Cameroon, did an MSc in the UK, then a PhD, and then some other side courses. So education has always been like a very recurrent theme throughout my upbringing. But nah, staying out of trouble, I wouldn't listen. I wouldn't say that. I think in secondary school, we call it the minor seminary, right up to high school. I think from Form 3, which is the third year in secondary school, right up to upper seat, which is the last year in high school, I always had suspensions.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
staying out of trouble. I wouldn't say like, yeah, I was staying out of trouble. So like, yeah. But one thing which saved me from my troubles was like they knew like, yeah, I would get into trouble, but academically, I was still strong academically. So like, that's how I put it.
So, would you say that your parents were actually paramount to your parents or any guardian in your life at that moment was actually paramount to you loving education, reading, and trying to be curious all the time?
Most definitely, because interestingly enough, both my parents are teachers, and
Oh,
you know what they say about teachers' kids. So most definitely, I think my parents just I wouldn't say they play a big role. I think the whole role was just like me being who I am today. It's all credit to them, especially at that young age. Both of them, being teachers, have quite a huge influence in shaping my love for books, my love for this info education. And one thing I would say very much, well, trying to listen to put into perspective my academic performances and me getting into crime was almost all the time. When I perform well at school and still get suspended or still get into trouble in school, my dad will always tell me like, education without character or education without discipline is useless. So all of that, like that's what shape this in my growing up. Yeah.
okay. So now we actually know you a bit more, and knowing
Yeah.
that both parents were actually teachers, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't want to jump to conclusion, but what exactly was success like for you? Is it was success I need to, um, be knowledgeable. I need to be that kid who knows everything. You can literally throw any question at me and I have something to say. Like as a kid, what in your mind, how would you have defined it versus where you currently are now?
I think that's a question I could throw back at you. You don't need to answer.
Oh,
Yeah, you don't need to answer now. And why I say I could throw back at you is because whatever response you give is probably going to be the same in my context.
really?
If it is, if you get what I did, if you get what I mean. However, for the benefit of the doubt, growing up, what does success look like? Success look like white in the sense like remember I told you I was in a minor seminary and that was this and that was growing up and being a Catholic priest and all of that. Then the question I get to ask you, what's the color of the clothes the Catholic priests wear? White. So that didn't listen, that didn't happen. So what was the next plan now? That's me now in pharmacy or medical school, as we call it in Cameroon. What's the color of the garments that doctors wear?
It's also white.
So and that's why I say success looks like this and looks like white because especially when you're a top performing student, as how humbly I was, especially when it comes to the science subjects and all of that, there's an expectation of like you either become a doctor or an engineer, like those kind of like traditional paths. And I always used to refer to myself and still refer to myself as a very sad young man, sad SAD. And by sad, I don't mean this, I don't mean unhappy. I don't
Okay.
mean by sad is more or less of being smart, ambitious, and determined. And saying the way I saw it back then was like success was just more or less of having my dreams fulfilled. And back then, especially the dream I had, let's say in high school, that prompted me to go into pharmacy or medical school was to get into drug research and development. So that was my dream at that time. Emphasis of at that time because now system is different.
Okay.
And for me, success at that time looks like probably having a drug names in my name, having a drug like Carlson Queen or something of that sort, or having a drug production company. So that's what success looked like for me. And tell me again, what's the color of the drugs you're familiar with? White. So
Yeah.
when you ask me what does success look like for me growing up, that's what success looked like me,
Mhm.
just in for me growing up.
So then, wow, that's quite. I feel like it's a big contrast because from a priest versus pharmacy, medicine, that's like two different. I mean, apart from the fact that both of them are into like, healing, providing healing for the soul and providing.
Exactly.
Apart from that, it feels like, okay, two different things. And what exactly would life be if you ended up being a priest and not what you are today? Well, we would never know.
Never, and that's a conversation for a different day.
Was there any period in your life where, I mean, whilst you were going through all the stages or growing up to be a young man and, I mean, being born in Cameroon, was there any part of your life where you actually felt stuck? You felt like I'm surrounded by these priests. My parents are teachers. I mean, I'm surrounded by so many, for lack of better words, let me say distractions, right? Was there
Mm.
any point in your life where you were like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Or how would life look like?
Feeling stuck or feeling lost or feeling unsure. Now more than ever before at this stage in my life, it's kind of like a constant in life. You can't go through life without having some degree of uncertainty, whether it's to put on this blouse or to put on that t-shirt, or there's some degree of this of uncertainty. So I think by just doing that is just trying to establish before getting into my own experience, is establish that uncertainty is more or less of a constant in life. I think what was this thing? There's this thing they say in physics, like entropy. There's
Mhm.
this thing, or disorder is more permanent than order. So life as well. I think I'm coming to appreciate it both professionally and personally, and to be much more comfortable in ambiguity, in uncertainty, to be much more comfortable. I think the higher your degree of comfort in uncertainty, I think the happier your life or the more successful your life is going to be. So growing up now, it's more or less of thinking, I think, or going back then now to this into the advanced levels. I don't know if it's the same thing in Ghana, but having the advanced levels. At my advanced levels, I didn't perform as good as I would have expected of myself. And talk less of I didn't perform up to expectations of my parents or my teachers. It was way below the expectation bar. So that influenced now the like kind of programs I could get to, the kind of universities I could get to. So there was that feeling in like stuck, like, okay, so which one is it going to be? Am I going to read medicine? Am I going to read pharmacy? Am I even going to read any of those? Or if I don't read any of those, what do I get to do? So, like, that's very well, this in very early on, and that was sometime back in 2011. Then, yeah, I wrote a couple of this in a couple of government, we call it concours. Concours is French for, in English, you call it entrance exams into these medical schools and all of that. And yeah, I didn't get any. So
Mm.
it's more or less like, okay, so where do we go from here? And all of that. Thankfully, this is one of the private universities. They had their own way of admitting, which was different from the state universities. So that's how I found myself doing pharmacy. So I did pharmacy for the first year. For the second year, going to my third year of pharmacy, lo and behold, the pharmacy school and the medical schools were suspended. So then again, asking myself, where do I go from here? Like, what do I do and what do I do? She wrote a couple of entrance exams into state medical schools, and that wasn't successful. So it's not like, what do I do? Remember the dream I told you, drug
Mhm.
research and development. So the closest I could get to was biochemistry. So switching now from pharmacy to biochemistry. So did the biochemistry, that's what I have my undergraduate in. And then from now, it's like, okay, I don't know the situation in Ghana, but in Cameroon, having a bachelor's degree is just as good as having a first school leaving certificate. If it was paper, the paper is as good as writing some this, wrapping some grill meat to puff puff in it. That's as good as the value of a bachelor's degree.
Mm.
So then it's more or less like, okay,
Be
what
nice.
do I do? And like now trying to figure out what to do. It's also now like I remember this in actually printing my CV, thinking of that CV. I can't even remember what of substance was there in that CV. I'm moving from pharmacy to pharmacy in my hometown of Bamenda, dropping my physical CV there. Did I get a call? I'm yet to get a call this in more than 10 years later. But eventually now it's more or less of like, okay, in this period of waiting, what now do this and what now do I do? Trying to figure the way out and all of that. And my thinking at that point in time was to like probably get some experience and all of that. And that's when I spent about 6 months in a diagnostic laboratory, which was clinical laboratory. So that's like when now had to examine the likes of feces or blood samples, just like for this. Yeah. And then later on now, like still driven by that dream. I always keep pointing back to that dream, still driven by that dream. Spend some time now, let's call it a pharmaceutical plant where they did like drip production and also did bottled water. So driven by that now, I was like, it would be good to have that experience where they actually produce quote unquote the same drugs. So that's where I spent some time. But all of that was the same, was more or less like free labor because no one was paying me for that and they weren't going to take me. So from then I was like, where do we go from here? What is in do with my life? And that was in 2015. And I remember like that's when like Facebook, I don't say social media, Facebook in particular was like proliferating, booming. So that's how I was now able now to like get into the space and now like interact with people, deliver projects and all of that. But still, at every instant, every year or every 2 years, you get to question yourself like, what am I doing in my life, or like where do I go from here? So that's why I started off by saying like you get to this and you have to be comfortable with ambiguity or with uncertainty because even 10, 15 years right now, I'm still being faced with such challenges and like yeah.
Wow. There's something you actually said that really caught my attention, and I think I sometimes find myself telling other younger people, right, who are
Yeah.
like also doing their bachelors. You said that you were engaged in, let's quote unquote, free labor, right? No one was paying you, but you were doing all these things. Was there a reason why you were actually doing that? Is it, well, one might actually say maybe at that time there was nothing to do, but then looking back, did that contribute in any way?
In life,
Mm.
something has to give. You have to pay the price in one way or another. And listen, back then with that quote unquote free labor, and I was being driven by a dream. The dream of that drug research and this and development. I was really principally driven by this and driven by that. And that's why I didn't mind doing the free labor because I felt like in doing that free labor, I'll be able now to leverage that experience in doing that free labor to get to where I wanted to be. So it's kind of like if I was going to apply for a job or if I was going to apply for, let's say, a master's, because I remember that period, I also applied for a master's in biotechnology in South Africa, like to be able to leverage it. Like I've just seen, I have some experience in disease diagnosis, even if it's at the community level, maybe I'm not gene sequencing, but I'm able to this and understand like how it takes to diagnose like malaria or cholera or those kind of things. I'm able to do that. Likewise, with this thing with pharmaceutical this implant, so like, oh no, I have these experiences of good manufacturing practices, which is a big thing when it comes to like production or in clinical trials. Was able to leverage like I've worked in this setting and all. So back then that was what was on my mind. So I didn't care about the lack of pay, even though my parents weren't seeing it that way. I didn't care about the lack of pay, because that's what I was dreaming at. But at the same time, it's not saying like we should sacrifice some sort of financial compensation or financial stability for this free work because of exercise. I didn't mind that because first things first, I was receiving some sort of monthly allowance from my parents. And then I also had to mention Facebook because when Facebook came now, that's when I was not able now. I was working at the same time as a community or social media manager, so which I was being paid for. So at least by being paid for that now, I didn't care about the pay that was meant to come from this quote unquote free work that I was in. But the experience which I had from it now was what I thought I could I could leverage to get to where I wanted to get. Yeah.
The reason why I asked you this was because, a lot of young people, I'm actually happy you mentioned this. A lot of young people, let me talk specifically Ghanaians, right? There was a point where there was this lady who was going viral. She's like she's a very young person who was popular in the youth space. She went viral saying that okay, instead of they letting us get paid, they just like, use young people and I mean, they have to pay them, and even if they're not paying them, like they should only work on things that they came in to do, right? I feel like as a young person, right,
Mhm.
it's actually the experiences that shape you. Because regardless of what, I mean, as long as it's a good space, regardless of what space you find yourself in,
Yeah.
one way or the other, it contributes. Like, even if you have, let's say, a very annoying, like, boss or manager, it's still shaping you in a way because it's helping you to know how to, um, tolerate or how to be strong because the world isn't fair, right? So I really wanted to know your take on it. Like, was it really, do you regret it or like you're like, yeah, I'm actually happy even though I wasn't paid, I'm actually happy I did that. Was that how you feel about it?
Uh, Not along those lines.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is not almost as. I get to appreciate this and appreciate where you're coming from, and I also get to appreciate the other person's perspective. I'll listen. I'll reframe the question again and ask this in like, if I was to go back and do it, why to do it, especially given the current context. No,
Mm.
I won't.
Okay,
Why
that
do I
makes
say
it.
so?
Why? Mhm.
Yeah, why do I say so? Why do I say so? Because things have changed. That was 10 years ago. In fact, yeah, about 10 years it is in 10 years ago, and a lot has changed over that period. Because now what I know now is different from what I did and what I knew then, and I now have insights into how some of these organizations operate, into how some of these NGOs operate. I have that insights in such a way that I can't make that same decision I made back then with the knowledge which I have now. But because currently now we have to listen, and that's why always in context matters. The context of the current day is different from the context this in 10 years or this in ago. The decision of the youths now is different from the needs of the youths this and back then. And one thing you can agree with me, whether publicly, privately, or in between the lines, is like money is a major issue. Back then, the amount of data you could get on your phone for 100 Ghana cedis is equivalent to amount of data you can get
Mm.
these days for this for 500 Ghana cities. So you get to see those things have changed. So back then I could easily sacrifice to load that 100 Ghana cities worth of data, but these days like 500 like it's not worth much these days. So that's why I wouldn't go back. Also, I also come from this and also come from this background, especially with my PhD. It's now looking now at community health workers. These community health workers that are being looked like, oh no, they should volunteer. And because they should volunteer, that now does away now that responsibility for incentivizing or remunerating them appropriately. So it's kind of now like just exploiting that motivation or that drive that these community health workers have, or in the context of use. People now tend now to exploit their drive for their dreams and all of that, to exploit that. But at the same time, no, beyond that drive, these are see people that youths are this day that are already parents, they have these family responsibilities. So you can't treat them as just like this goal or dream driven person without remunerating them, without incentivizing them. That's why I would say like I won't make the same decisions now as I did back then. But in this context, it's so advocating for this, let's call it appropriate remuneration of youths who are chasing their dreams. Like, yeah, it must not be a full-time salary, but just something to cover for transportation, to cover for data expenses. Like, yeah, I mean that's a cavalry I'm willing to die on.
Okay. I mean, actually, I support that because what you just said now that, youth some years ago actually different from the like current youth because now with price hikes and all that, it's times are actually really,
That's
really
a hard.
exactly. Sometimes when we're going in for a job or for like a role, they ask, okay, we need this years of experience. You're trying to like find ends meet or you're trying to like get into your position and they're asking you for 4 years, 3 years of experience, right? So for this young boy, for this young girl who comes from, like humble beginnings and they find themselves in a situation where they can actually get that experience or get some form of like exposure through some organizations, right? And if the payment, right, the
Yeah.
kind of like soft pad to give them to hold them is not that enough, should they still at least like consider that or find a place where okay they can get the experience at the same time being like fairly compensated?
That's a good one because it speaks to the core of everything. And I'll go back to what I said at the beginning of the previous response. in life, something has to give. And to add to that, it's like in addition to something having to give, is to listen, is to find that balance. And I don't dismiss of voluntary activities. I don't dismiss of that. I also don't dismiss of quote unquote free labor because or admit that some organizations that are doing good work at the same time they don't have the resources to cater for this and for that. Yeah, I'll keep on saying I'm from a modest background, but I was fortunate enough to receive like a monthly allowance from my parents during that period. Some youths can't. That's a privilege that I didn't have. Some youths can boast of this and of that privilege. So then they have now to this balance between this in doing work that is going to pay them to make ends meet and doing work which they could leverage to meeting their dreams. So it's not really black or white to do or not to this or not to do. And that's why very much my favorite color is gray because I believe very much we're in a gray area, that's in that area between the black and the whites. So this and what I'm saying now is not going to be applicable to everybody. And if you remember very much when I was talking about the dream I had, I was mentioned that was a dream at that time. That's not currently my dream. And why I'm saying that is because dreams to change. In as much as dreams to come true, dreams to this and to change. So when chasing this and trying to balance now, like should I go for paid work even though it doesn't lead to my dream, or should I go for this in labor in that moment? What are the needs of this moment? Can I go for the paid work now while doing part time on the free level, like just trying to find that balance. And balance looks different for this and for different people because you're talking about that needing 3 4 years experience to get a job. From what I know, I'll give you this example. For my current job, the experience which I used for that current job, I wouldn't say it was free labor. I was paid to work 10 hours a week. That's not full time level. And within those 10 hours of the week, I had to do this I had to study. I was doing some sort of let's call it a part-time this in a diploma course. So the time I spent studying was what I was being paid for. So technically I was being paid to study and I was able now to to leverage that to have the current job which I have now, which is paying me this in full time. The little you do, you don't write it off in case you're doing little free labor while you're doing this in something I paid for that you don't like, but you don't write it off. But yeah, I think that's also something we could also talk at some other days and some other time.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Like that was insightful. But now I want us to move to something a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah.
You actually mentioned that there was a turning point for you. What exactly was the moment before that turning point, and what was the turning point?
I can tell you the turning point. The turning point was Ghana.
Okay. Okay.
Gimpa, Accra, Ghana, Ashimota.
Oh, yeah, very specific. Okay.
Yes, that was a turning point, but that was the moment leading to the turning point. So remember that dream of this scene, the dream of wanted to get in drug production and all of that. So I had my undergraduate in this in biochemistry. I did these placements and all of that, and like yes, he wasn't able to listen to something to do in Cameroon. I also remember applying to go to China because, come on, we have to give it to China when it comes to like drug productions. Like, applied China Pharmaceutical University in particular. Yeah, just because, like, yeah, I couldn't continue in pharmacy, but I could continue in pharmaceutics. So I wanted to do pharmaceutics, a master's in pharmaceutics at China Pharmaceutical Nursing University. So applying for this, applied there, got the admission but never got a visa. I mean, the visa in Cameroon, I don't know if it's the same in Ghana, is quite difficult. Like, even to get a visa appointment, you need to get an appointment with the person who is giving the appointment to get the appointment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Listen, I didn't get a visa in time, so I lost my mission. I think the next year again, she applied, had a scholarship to do a master's and a PhD in pharmaceutics, but for the same reasons, she couldn't get a visa. So that's just me, like, when we're talking of being lost or being stuck, that was just me being in that space. But within the same time as well now, like that's when I started venturing now into more of what you're doing now, this youth development, this entrepreneurship or youth empowerment. Within that period, that was around 2016, 2017, I wrote a book called Creativity, which was more or less of like from dreams or ideas to like into ventures. So that's when I did that. But at the same time now, it was more or less of feeling like this is not where I want to be, and I need to move forward. So I published a book. It was good, like, yeah, getting some online accolades, being this and being viral, yeah, and this and there. Like, yeah, it was that feel good moment, but at the same time, my call, it was more or less of like, this is not where I want to be. So that's why I now started thinking of going back to the school for this informal masters. Like, China didn't materialize, but so I needed to do something. So I was now looking at the options in Cameroon. So at that point in time now, it was now why the dream in pharmacy or the dream in drug production. But in the way I saw it, the dream was inspired more or less of like, very much where if you go to the hospital that you're sick, you come back with drugs. If you complain to your mom that you're sick, she needs to check what drugs she has at home. Like, everything, sick, drugs, not feeling well, drugs. So I felt like that was sort of like the magic pill to this into sickness. So that's why I wanted to get into drug production to produce this magic that makes people well. That was
Okay.
basically it. And also because it was this thing, it was going to make a lot of money. I mean, drug production, it makes money right up to current day. If people are looking for where to go to where there's money, go into pharmaceutics. There is a lot of money. As
Okay.
much as there is money in tech, there is as much money in pharmaceutics. So that was this, and that was my reasoning. But at that point in time now, I went to pharmacy school. It didn't work out. I did biochemistry. I applied for pharmaceutics. It didn't work out. It was more or less now this thing. Asking my this at that point in time, I asked my other cousin, who was this a medical doctor and epidemiologist, like, what about this thing? What does the field of public health look like? So that's when my dreams now changed from pharmaceutics to public health. And that was in the midst of all of that frustration. I couldn't go to China to do the pharmaceutics. So it's more or less of like public health now seems now like the most this and the most efficient or the most feasible thing to do next, which is going to keep me in line. And why I had to mention talking to my other cousin and all of that is just for this and for anyone listening. It's like sometimes you're feeling stuck, but you need to talk to someone who is of like where you want to be or who has an
I was
idea
just
of where.
about to ask you that.
Yeah, that's this, and that's why I did. And I asked him like, "What about it?" And he just now broke it down to me like in public health is beyond public health in general. There's this and there's statistics, or there's statistics, there's epidemiology, there's policy and management, and all of that. So that's what he told me. So in that moment, because I remember that happened when he was going to drop me off at the park from Yaoundé, which is the capital of Cameroon, to go back to Bamenda, which is a hometown, because my parents were like, okay, since he's not getting the visa appointment, come back to this and come back home. So it was in that moment that's like, okay, I'll consider this public health aspect. But then again, to see how that dream influenced the direction I was taking, I looked at it and I saw like epidemiology was the closest to that drug research and production, which was my dream. So in that moment now, I was like, okay, I was going to do a master's in molecular epidemiology and diagnostic sciences. So that's a branch of epidemiology that contributes to that drug research and development. That just to show you like how I was being driven by this and by that dream. But I remember very much well when I started this in that master's, I
Hmm.
was like, I need to leave Cameroon. Even though I had failed in this in Cameroon through the visas and all of that. But in my
Application.
mind, I was like, I needed to leave Cameroon. And all through that period, my parents were the ones who were pushing me, like, you need to leave to go study and all of that. But I also remember very much well while I was in that master's in molecular epidemiology, my dad visited me in my university hostel. And I told him, like, that day I want to leave Cameroon. And I'll never forget his response. He said, like, I've always been for you leaving Cameroon. I've just never had the means to like push you out of this and push you out of Cameroon. So around that period now, that's when YALI, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the Young African Leadership Initiative, the YALI program, was quite active, and that period that's when they launched the applications for the Regional Leadership Center, which was in Ghana. So that's when I applied and I was chosen. And interestingly enough, like the period when I was meant to Ghana for YALI, was the same period when I had my second semester's exams in my master's. So it was look of things was going to fall in the same week. Like the week people were traveling was a week of my exams.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, I didn't mind missing my exams just to travel to this and travel to Ghana just for that experience. And that's why I said like, yeah, that turning point was Ghana because like from then that's like where everything changed for me.
Okay, I'm happy that you mentioned there's something I actually want to. Okay, this photo right of you and a group of people.
Can
This
you
is
spot me?
I can't spot you. I think you're a guy at
Yeah,
the back over there.
yeah.
This was in Ghana, right?
Yeah, that was in Ghana. That was in Gimpa, Ashimota. That's why I referred to that particular. That was like the Gimpa campus. And the lady
Oh,
seated by me, Vera, Ghanaian, and then the
okay.
other lady, Pearl, is also Ghanaian.
Leaving Cameroon, okay, it's like your mantra, like for okay, I have to leave Cameroon.
Yeah.
Was like you've moved a step forward into actually doing that. So from Ghana, right, was the plan now from, I mean, Cameroon to Ghana? And what role specifically did Ghana have to play in your journey?
That's a very good one. And how can I listen? How can I put it? Let's put it in this context of environment. That's the context I'm going to place my response. Because first things first, like with Yali at that time, it's not so the same right now, especially due to funding cuts and all of that. Yali at that time was a big thing. Like when you see a Yali fellow and all of that, it's kind of like, oh, well respected and all of that. So it was also in line with this thing with like the kind of things I was seeing this and doing back then with like the book I wrote or in the events we used to organize for this youth empowerment, trying to drive for entrepreneurship mindset among youths and all of that. And so that's how I was much more motivated to go for Yali because it's more or less of like going there and learning more, developing those competencies of a youth leader and all of that. So that's like what this drove me towards that. And I'll always listen, I always say it, like unshamefully, like that was the first time I got on a plane. And that was the first time I was living Cameroon. And like all of that experience was an experience I liked. I love the experience of this like flying. I love the experience of like being in a new country. I love the experience of like meeting people. Like all of that experience I liked. So I was like, yeah, I need to do more of these. So that was like what now for that aspect to this to leave Cameroon. So in leaving Cameroon and coming into Ghana, like it was a whole different system. I know, yeah, you have criticisms against your systems in Ghana, but comparing that to us, that we've had one president for the last 45 years, trying to just compare those governance systems and seeing a system like that works differently, like that was like what now like triggered me like, oh no, I like this experience. I want to go and experience more because exposure, it's from this exposure that even if people didn't have certain dreams, those dreams could be ignited. We had people from Nigeria, we had people from Gambia, we had people from Liberia and Sierra Leone. So just getting to understand those context, being exposed to this into different cultures in a confined space, it still was something like which was very much enriching for me. So I remember when I went back to Cameroon, I was this experience.
Mm.
I want more of this experience. And it was based on this exposure that I was like, okay, I was going to go in for the Chevening scholarship, which is a UK government scholarship, very, very competitive. And yeah, I went in for the Chevening scholarship. I had the Chevening scholarship at this in our first attempt.
You want to ask you about that when you came
Yeah,
to Ghana, the
yeah.
environment just sparked something in you, right? I want to find out, did you make that decision, like to apply for the scholarship when you were in Ghana, or it was after you left Ghana back to Cameroon and then you like, no, I have to do this.
First things first, like Ghana was just more or less of that, how can we say it, proof of concept. You can leave. And you can leave your country not spending money because it was a fully funded trip. I didn't pay for my flight, I didn't pay for my accommodation, I didn't pay for my feeding. Like it was fully funded. And at the end of the day, again, was given some sort of like was just this in some sort of Ghana was that's why I said like Ghana was that turning point for me. It was some sort of proof of concept. You can do these travels without necessarily spending your own money. In case you're thinking of like, so my background or because of my circumstances, I can afford to travel and all of that. So that shouldn't stop you, because the people who are willing to listen to pay for you to travel, to develop you. So when I returned to Cameroon now, after going through the application process for Yali, after going to this, after going to Ghana itself and coming back and being exposed to all of that, there was a momentum. And I was like, I think I can go for this, and I think I can go for more. All my plannings of like wanting to leave, wanting to leave Cameroon, like the UK wasn't an option for me, because when I wanted to leave Cameroon, it was me wanting to pay for myself to leave Cameroon. But I knew the UK was expensive, and I couldn't fund myself to go to this into the UK. But then now comes the Chevening scholarship. A friend encouraged me to this into apply, and I applied with that confidence of like, yeah, this confidence, and like, yeah, here I am today.
Would you say that to every young person, like, are you saying they should just, go ahead and apply to that they feel are like beyond their reach?
Yes, that is what I'm saying.
Okay.
In simple, this in categorically, that's what I'm saying. I don't know this. I don't know how much you or this or those who are listening to on TikTok or into Instagram Reels, but there's this song like, this year I'm going to cut my coat more than my
Oh
size.
yeah.
And that's the mindset, and I want people to listen, people to go to be audacious and to this and go for it. When it comes to these applications, you have one job only: apply. That's your job. Apply. Simple. Don't roll yourself out, because your job is not to assess your application. Your job is to put in the best possible application. Those who are assessing application, that's their job. They're being paid for that. So your own job is to apply. So whatever it is, in whatever the case, apply. That's the least you can do. What's the worst that can happen? You get a no. So when you get a no, so what? That's that's not going to be the first rejection you're receiving. So just apply.
I like that. Just
Just
apply.
apply. Simple. As Nike says, just do it.
Just apply.
Yes.
Okay. So now we to know you more. We now know Ghana played a huge role in like your turning point. Now, present day, what exactly are you working on? Like, I mean, aside from being Dr. Carlson.
I'm just being Carl.
We are not going to take that. No, we won't take that.
Yeah, I'm just being Carl. And what is it I'm doing these days? Talking to you, sharing my experiences. First, just to give you this and give you some context to the work I do, like beyond on the professional side of this of Dr. Carl. So my PhD is in global health.
Okay.
And my focus in global health is health system strengthening in fragile and conflict affected settings, which is basically looking at in development terms we call it the global south, but in my terms is looking at sub-Saharan Africa. Like that's where majority of fragile and conflict affected regions or contexts are found. So that's my interest, and that's been inspired from my experience in Cameroon, coming from that conflict affected regions in Cameroon. So that's like what inspired me to move from pharmaceutical sciences to global health or social sciences, if we want to call it that. So that's what my PhD is in. That's what my master's was in, all in global health, focus on health system strengthening. So that now puts me in the position of working with or for the UK government as a senior technical officer for Global One Health Security. And health security is just basically looking at pandemic preparedness and response. So in case there's a next COVID and all of that, like it is my job from the UK perspective to like see how we can approach that that the mistakes of COVID are not met again. So I'm very much in that space of health security. So if we're looking at what I do now, combining with my academic background, is health system strengthening for health security. So that's my job with the UK government. And aside that, now trying to keep my research roots or academic roots going now, I'm working on looking at strengthening surveillance systems for disease outbreaks in the Lake Chad Basin. So the Lake Chad Basin from the country Chad, the Lake Chad Basin comprises Chad as a country,
Okay.
Cameroon as a country, Nigeria as a country, and Niger. as a country. So those are the four countries that encompasses what we refer to as the Lake Chad basin. And the Lake Chad itself, like it has this in loss about more than 60% of his body. So I'm looking now at this in the intersection of climate change
Mhm.
as a driver for health security. I'm looking now at conflict because that's that region where, when we talk of the Boko Haram is in that region of the Chad Basin. I'm looking now at conflict, and then I'm now looking now at this in at displacement as a result of conflict and climate change, which are also drivers of disease transmission or like human animal. So I'm now looking now like in that region that has this multiplicity of challenges, how now can we just strengthen the surveillance systems from the community right up to the national level? How can we strengthen that surveillance pipeline for this info disease dictation? So that's like one project which I'm working on now, and I'm looking for funding. So if you have let's say some £500,000 or even 1 million, this in 1 million, I'll take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We will actually note the Ellisma Foundation. We will note that for you.
So,
Okay.
yeah, but that's this and that's what I'm this and that's what I do these days. Like yeah.
Wow. This is actually like very things. Yeah. I mentioned really big technical things. And I'm actually, whilst you were talking, I was like, wait, would young Carl actually believe you today? Like, would you Carl believe that, okay, yeah, talking about, trying to um use climate change and the effects of conflict on how Lake Chad Basin is, depleting. Would young Carl going to believe you if he saw you today?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like I'm disappointed in you. You can do more.
Oh, okay. So it means it's all about having this audacious mentality, right?
Yeah, I think I think so. And listen, don't get me wrong. Like I'm that audacious and like yeah, I just go for everything and all of that. That's far from reality. That's far from this and that's far from reality because you spoke about struggling with just an uncertainty or feeling lost or feeling stuck and all of that. But you don't talk about just in self-doubt and all of that because like yeah, I struggle with self-doubt myself. Like it's taking me about a year to develop this project in the Lake Chat Basin which I'm talking about. So like I'm talking about it now because I finally put it. But if you ask me before putting this, like I wouldn't have been with this degree of this of certainty or confidence. So it's just more or less to those who are listening, to those who are going to listen to this or are listening to this at this point in time. It's kind of like, yeah, you might be looking at me and I'm like, oh no, I'm these grand ideas or this vision and all of this. Oh yeah, I have this and I will take it. Like it's good to listen to feel like you can inspire people. It is good. But one thing you should also appreciate is like listen, I'm only human, just like you. Like if you cut my veins, it's going to be blood. It's not going to be so bolo that it's going to come out of it. It's going to be blood. And with this thing come these human tendencies of this thing like self-doubt or this thing or sometimes like low self-esteem and all of that. That doesn't mean that should be a reality. Irrespective of that self-doubt, irrespective of that self-esteem, is more or less of like how I feel in the moment. However, how this thing I still need to work to this thing to work towards it. Which is I think the same line when it comes to like courage and fear. So courage, I say courage is not the absence of fear, but courage is acting regardless of the fear. And that's why when you ask like young Carl looking at all of these talks, I'm kind of like, yeah, you just need to believe it, but at the same time, like kind of like, no, I'm disappointed because I know you can do this and you can do more. You can do more than this. And I'm doing all of this against backdrop of my doubts and all of those things, knowing very much I can do more than all of these things I'm seeing that you are saying, oh, they're big. For me, I feel like they're not big enough. Yeah.
So you're saying do it regardless.
Do it regardless. Just do it. Just apply. Just do it.
Okay. It might be personal for you, might not be personal for you, but we actually want to find out. What role did this woman play in your life as a young person?
This woman, her name is Susan
Okay.
Njema Awe, popularly known as Dr. C. So
Okay.
you remember when I told you I was this thing, I was working for free and then I was getting money from social media or from Facebook as a community manager and all of that.
Mhm.
This is the person who recruited me
Mm-hmm.
to the scene to be her community manager for what was then called the Dr. C initiative,
Okay.
which was basically a health education, this an education platform. She saw what I was doing on social media with my personal blog and all of that. And that's when she invited me. He was the one who invited me. And the relationship developed from there, from being just like boss and subordinate, but more or less of this in mentor and mentee. Because if you go to my Instagram, you're going to see like my name on this in Instagram is Dr. C's son. So
That's why I wanted to find out more.
yeah, that's not my biological mom, but that's more or less of she was my mentor, and she took me under her wings like this in the mother hen would take her chicks under her wings.
Okay.
And like even when applying for this for the Chevening scholarship in going to Ghana, she was meant to meet us in Ghana while I was in Ghana, but at that time she was sick. I didn't know the extent of her sickness, so she couldn't meet to me. It was after I left Ghana that she told me like, oh no, she had breast cancer.
Mm.
And even when I was applying for the Chevening scholarship, I still had my doubts because one thing I didn't say was like in applying for the Chevening scholarship, even though I had it at first attempt, in applying for the Chevening scholarship, I almost didn't apply. Why? Because I prepared my applications, the self-doubt got the best of me, and I thought I wasn't good enough, so I didn't submit my applications. So the deadline passed, my applications were ready, but I didn't submit it. Honestly, I didn't click submit deliberately. The friend I was working with, she reached out to me and she was like, did I submit? And I was like, oh no, the systems crashed because actually the systems crashed. That was true. The systems crashed. I couldn't submit. She was like, oh, okay. Now they've granted an extension. Go and submit. So that's how I submitted. And this is why I found myself. That's and so when I tell you, like, just submit. That's why I say that, like, from my own experience. She was the one who was guiding me, like, oh no, you can't do this and all of that. Like, no, she was very much instrumental in this in me being who I am at this point in this at this point in time, and that's why I maintain that tag of Dr. Season. Unfortunately, she died of breast cancer in December 24th, 2018. And my understanding of like the name Sakudie, it means eagle, something of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in Ghana, I was like, yeah, what Ghanaian name am I going to take? I was going to take on Sakudie. Sakudie was my favorite Ghanaian artist at this and at that time. So I took on that name, especially after knowing the meaning of the name. So when she died now, I took it now like, okay. So you know the eagle, like with these eagles, like for them to learn how to fly, they're being pushed out of their nest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, too.
When she died now, that's the interpretation I took out of that. Like I've been pushed out of my nest without the guidance of my mentor, without the guidance of my mom, without the guidance of Dr. C. I now have to find my this and have to find my footing in life and all of that. So thanks very much for this and for doing efficient research and this and I'm coming up with this in that one. I wasn't sure what you're going to pull up, but no, that was a good one.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So then are you saying that every young person, it's quite important for every young person to find a mentor?
So in as much as you breathe in, breathe out, you need to talk to this and you need to talk to people. When I was applying for the yearly or interviewing for the yearly program in Ghana, I was asking about networking and all of that. So I came up with this very interesting line which has stuck with me. People are people because of people. That's what I believe in. If we talk in terms of like mentorship and all of that, like yeah. I mean, the Nigerians they say, follow person with no road, follow the person who knows the distance of the road. So you need to follow someone, you need to speak to follow someone doesn't necessarily mean like physically or emulating the career path, all of that. It's more or less of talking with them, asking them, how do I approach this? How do I get to this? And all of that. I myself, even level, I still have mentors. And listen, you must not have one mentor, you have mentors for different purposes or for different aspects of your life, be it your relationship with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, be it with your spiritual life, be it with your professional life, or be it just as an adult, you need this and you need those mentors. And even your mentors have mentors. That's why you ask me, like, is it a medication? I won't say medication because medications, you take it and then once you achieve it, you stop. But I will say, no, it's a must. I have a workplace mentor that I talk with her almost every month to prepare me for my next role. Like, what is it I need to do? How do I approach this? And she has given me insights on how to respond to certain interview questions, insights on how to read even a common job description to be able to read in between the lines. That's the function of this, my workplace mentor. That's just to tell the importance of this mentorship and all of that. So it's not a medication.
Briefly, what should a young person, a young African,
Yeah.
out in when picking a mentor? Like, do you just go like, okay, this person is great. I need you as my mentor. Like, what exactly should you look out for to let that person actually mentor them?
The question is like, yeah, this person is great. And I was like, great for what?
Okay.
Because of all of what I've said, yeah, you might all know, like, yeah, no, this guy he has it figured out, like Cameroon, UK, working with the UK government, thinking of how to conquer like Chad and all his disease, all of that. Like, oh no, he could be my mentor. But mentor in what direction? Is it mentor in global health? Is it a mentor for exploring opportunities? Like mentor for what? What am I great for? Personally, I know where my strengths are. But for you, where do I fit in? So what am I great for when it comes to you and in that your grand plan? So the way I always say it is more or less of like, let's reverse engineer things. I know this is something you're very much familiar with. Let's reverse engineer things and let's reverse engineer things from where you want to be. We'll start in the end in mind. Like start from that end and then like working now to this into to current day. This is where I want to be. And for me to get there, I need to take this step, I need to take these steps. And for you to identify those steps, you need to work, you need to reverse engineer things. That's for people who are listening. You need to like start from there. But then now, how to move from point A to point B to point C and all of that. In moving from there now, there's some things that you won't know. Those are those things that prompt us to feel like lost or to feel like stuck. So that's when now in that moment, like in those things that you don't know, that's where now those mentors, advisors, or those people who have gone ahead come in play. So that's why when you say, oh, this is a great mentor, great what? At what stage? What is this person going to contribute to me? You're never going to have everything figured out, but you just have to have an idea of what you're trying to achieve. And then, like, when you see someone that looks quote unquote great, then you feel like, okay, no, this person is great in this aspect of my life. And that's how it is, and that's how it goes.
If you could speak to someone who is currently watching this and that person hasn't, had a turning point in their life yet, what would you say to that person?
Make this your turning point.
Okay, good. Okay. Okay.
Make this your turning point. There's a thing here. It goes to this, and it goes to this question of like, does everyone have a turning point, or do people make their turning points and all of that? It's not a yes or no. As I said, my favorite color is gray, and that gray is based this because of my philosophy. It's not a yes or a no. Okay, yes, everyone has a turning point, and yes, everyone can make their own turning point because in this life there are some things that are not within our control. You understand? So, take for example, people who are here listening now, or people who will listen later. Maybe some of the things which I've said can now influence them to take that decision. Or maybe the work that you're doing through the Early Smiles Foundation by engaging with the foundation, that is your turning point. On the other side now, in terms of now like creating their turning points now, it's more or less of like, I'm tired of this life I'm living. I need something different. That's you making your own turning point without necessarily external influence. That's you making your own turning point. Like, you know what, things need to change. So that's you making your own turning point. So in case of like people wanting to this in like yet to find their own turning points and all of that, bruv, make it your own turning point.
And just apply.
Just apply. Just send that text message. Just send that email. Like, just do it.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay. In the next 10 years, right? If
Yeah,
you actually had, yes, in the next 10 years, if you actually had total control of what you would engage in, what you would see, or what you would do, these three options, like what exactly would it be?
that's aside making a lot of money.
Yes.
Yes, that's quite an interesting question. Now, why do I say interesting is because I had a job, a couple of weeks ago, and this kind of like sprung up. In the next 10 years, I'm going to find myself in a position of power, not the president of Cameroon, and not just power, but power and influence when it comes to this health space, especially when it comes to like the African health space. So probably at the head of the African Union, the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Like, yeah, most of the jobs I apply for these days now is more or less of like, how do they maybe in there. Funny thing, and let's go off tangent a little bit. Like, when I see the role, I'm interested in the role, and given how much I use AI or ChatGPT in particular, and I take that role and I this in the job description, I put in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT knowing my career aspirations, I ask ChatGPT how does this contribute to where I want to this and I want to be. So it shows like it's contributing to it, and so I want to be in that position of power and influence into shape system in Africa. That might not be a job title. It might not be that African CDC. It might be in a different organization. But I just want to be in that position of power where I'm able to like shape things or influence. So we're having this conversation, and we're just six of us on this on the call. I like having such conversations. As you have realized, I can talk and talk about these things and listen and go. But one thing which I always dreamt of was concerts where like Drake, Beyonce,
Mm-hmm.
Stadium Field, and all of that. Like, yeah, I want to have this kind of field of people wanting to this and wanting to have this. I think also if it was within my country, it's also like instilling young people or more or less of like that belief that regardless of not dismissing their backgrounds, but they can see do great things. And last one, which I've always had in mind, if it was within my control, and I'm hitting my chest on this one, if it was within my control, I'll cure the wall of ignorance. Yeah,
Oh, that's a good one. That's actually a good one. That's a very good one. Okay, yes, that would really help.
I know, right?
Yeah, yeah. Before I let you do the very last thing, so on this series we have this thing that we are going to be doing. We give you a phrase and then you complete it for us. But before that, when you were saying that we have to just apply, we have to just apply, just do it right. The person was like, sometimes that's from Prince. Applying requires so much mental energy. So what do
uh,
you have to say to that? They should make
Prince,
the process easy for us so that we will just apply.
if it was this, if everybody will have it, and if everybody has it, you have no value.
Okay, okay.
Again, they say on TikTok or social media, I'll hold your hands while saying this. If you have the energy to wake up in the morning, then you have some energy to work on the application. And please do not take this as if I'm disregarding the this intense applications come through. It is a daily stuff for me. Last week ago, I had to send in an application, and it was quite a tough one for me. And this was an application I've been working on for about 3 weeks. It was, yeah, 3 weeks. It was something I wanted real bad, and I knew it was high. So like I applied on the eve of it because the deadline was on the 19th. I applied on the 18th. Like I know it's just sin, I know it's not easy, but at the same time now, this position in which I feel discouraged for whatsoever reason, do I want to keep staying in this position? As I said, it's simple, but it's not easy. Man, it's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you that it's easy. No, it is simple talking about these things, but you need motivation. Like, what is it you want? And that's why Cornell was talking on and started from by asking about that dream. You need to be driven by something. What is it you really want? You need something to drive you. And at some point in time, you have a wife, you have kids, you will need to eat. Going to work and say like, oh no, you can't do it because you don't have the mental energy or because you're discouraged. Then what about the kids you have there? What are you going to do about them? So in as much as those kids are drive for some people, look for something within you or within your dreams to make it like call it your this star, call it your guiding star that is going to like guide you out of feeling like discouraged or having that low energy. Because yeah, you need to choose. Something needs to drive you.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw a phrase to you, and you have completed for me.
Oh,
I too can do because.
okay. I'll give you two.
Okay.
One is for this and one is for us to laugh about it, and then one is for us to be serious. Because he that is in me is greater than he that is in the world.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's a good one.
When it comes now to our dreams and our professional backgrounds and all of these things, it's more or less of like I too can do great things because the struggles or the background that once broke me are now confidence to do great things.
Okay, amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Dr. Carl, thank you so much for sharing your journey so honestly and clearly with us. Um, I'm sure your story has inspired at least one person out there. To everyone watching this, if someone has done it, like coming from their background with uncertainty, you too can do it.
You
Especially
too.
when the path is very visible and clear enough. So that is why we are bringing I too can do. So there's going to be a space for clarity, a space for learning, a space to get exposed to real paths, relearning from people who are just like us, young people who have passed through what we have gone through. Yeah. So if you figured out a path and you're willing to share it honestly, we would love to hear from you. So, Dr. Carl, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure and honor to talk with you this Saturday afternoon. I thought I too can do. I too can do because I also have blood, not so below in my veins.
This is not going to go off record.